Hello, I'm Sarah Hanson-Young, author of En Garde, talking big ideas, little books with Hachette Australia.
Hello Sarah, thank you so much for joining us at Hachette's offices in Sydney. It's a delight to have you here, and just to introduce you, you're very well known of course to audiences, but just for our audience if they're not sure, you are the youngest woman ever to be elected to the Australian Parliament. You've had over a decade in politics as a Green Senator, and you're a leading voice for progressive change in Australia. You live in the Adelaide Hills and have a very optimistic daughter, teenage daughter called Cora, and it's such a pleasure to have you here. Thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So you went into politics at the age of 25. What? I know, shaking your head in disbelief.
The number of grey hairs on my head proves how long I've been there so far.
But why parliamentary politics? I understand getting politically engaged, it's wonderful, but why parliamentary politics?
Look, I was an activist for much of my uni years. And I worked for Amnesty International out of university. And I spent a lot of time trying to, from an activist perspective, trying to talk to politicians and convince them of things. And I became quite aware that there was firstly nobody in politics that looked like me, that I felt like really understood as a young woman what me and my peers were going through. But also I felt as though you can't just convince people to change their view all the time. You have to put your hand up and say, okay, well, maybe you should get in there and have a go too. So rather than just lobbying people, arguing with them, trying to convince them, I thought some of them needed to be replaced.
And have they, do you think?
Yeah.
Have you replaced? You have replaced.
I've replaced a couple. But
there has been generational change.
There has been generational change, and I think I think that's really great. There's generational change happening throughout all the parties, and therefore within the Parliament. And the changes that I've seen, I was talking to a young woman who got elected at the last election, sitting there in the Senate the other day from a different party, and it's so nice to look around the chamber and now see other young women coming forward, coming up. And that wasn't the way it was when I first came in. I was the youngest senator by far, and the youngest woman in the Parliament, and now I'm not, and I just think that's fantastic.
Fantastic. You start the book by En Garde. It starts by being a call for women to be more resilient, but also to acknowledge or own their vulnerabilities. How do you do both?
It's really difficult, and I spent a long time in politics thinking that I had to always be tough, because politics is tough. It's rough and tumble, it's robust. Any sign of weakness would be seen as, oh, well, you're not up to it, you're not up to the job. But people want politicians to be real. They want their representatives to feel what they're feeling. And you can only do that if you allow yourself to be open. And you can only be open if you allow yourself to be a bit vulnerable. We don't all have the answers to everything. And how do you know if somebody's arguing with you or putting a point of view that you're not missing something important if you're not open? So it's a constant balance. I spent a lot of my political career pretending that I wasn't vulnerable. The moment it became clear that I needed to acknowledge that for myself, I realised an enormous amount of strength. Internal, external support comes from actually just being a bit more real with people. I've always spoken the truth. I've always been prepared to call things for what they are, but I'd perhaps had a filter on how that made me feel. And now I've come to the realisation that politicians need to be people too, if you really want to connect.
The whole system seems to be set up against you being one being a person in parliamentary politics, in political life. And I always remember being so moved by how moved you were to tears talking about the asylum seekers. What was the response of people around you when you had tears in your eyes talking about that? That was quite a confronting moment for me, because I was talking about children that I'd met, and I was thinking very deeply about them at that time, that I'd met in detention. And for those people, and I still have people come up to me on the street and say, when you cried in Parliament that day, we know you had our back. These are people who have, now Australian citizens, they're contributing to our community, they are making great Australians. And so for them, it was really important that they had and heard that this wasn't just politics. This was a real call of support for them, and an understanding of what they were going through. Other people saw it as a sign of weakness. Oh, this is manipulative. She's upset because, she thinks that's going to work to win over voters. No. It didn't. If anything, it fed the kind of troll culture. But you just kind of have to, let that wash. You have to wear that. You have to let that wash over you. I found it quite confronting because I felt like I had let down my guard. On guard. Yeah.
And the golden rule in politics is you don't do that. I guess what I argue in the book is I think we need to rethink that. That golden rule, I'd argue, has probably been set by, a lot of the men who have been in that place before, women who have had to come through that system before I did, and had to play in a man's world and a man's way. And I came into politics as a young woman with a baby, as a single mum, and I was different from the beginning.
Yes.
I couldn't pretend that I was a bloke. I couldn't pretend that
they weren't going to let you.
They were never going to let me.
Never going to treat you.
They were never going to treat me like that. So as I've kind of, worked my way through, found my voice, found my strength in what I do. There's no point pretending. I don't want to be just like, a young female version of the blokes in there. I want to be the woman that I am, representing the community that support me.
And to be someone else.
And to be someone else. I went into politics because there wasn't anyone in that place who represented my generation and young women. That's why I did it. Why would I now, why change that?
And it's about authenticity, isn't it? In the end,
it is a battle of authenticity, and I think it's always a judgment call. But if you're true to yourself, I think voters respect that. I think the community respects that. Colleagues respect that.
Because it seemed to me that it was that moment of crying was authentic. It was a moment of being immensely moved. It comes upon you. We all know,
yes.
One can be completely dispassionate
Yes.
and performing,
Yes.
and then
Yes.
something in it triggers something. Of course, you've got a child. You've got so many reasons why you would be moved by the plight of these children incarcerated.
And what is the point of having debates unless you bring that real sense of understanding of impact? In our job as politicians is to, yes, make laws, debate the pros and cons of legislation, the Parliament is there to represent the people. If it was just about making laws, that would be left to bureaucrats. Our job is to try and understand and interpret how those things impact people. So you have to be able to feel, and you have to be able to communicate that. And I try and do that the best I can. And I think this mix of vulnerability and strength is not just something for politics. I think this is in all of our lives, that if you are able to be open and honest with yourself, then you will be stronger in the things that you're advocating for and the people that you help around you.
So let's talk a bit about, you talked about I think you called it the bear pit. I certainly think of it as a bear pit, that you live in your working life, your professional life. You've had some really challenging encounters in the Senate, haven't you? Minor appalling behaviour, like Cory Bernardi, and I'd like you to describe that. And then the more recent challenge of David Leyonhjelm's appalling behaviour. Maybe you could talk to those two. Because we're talking to young women, this is books about a clarion call to young women to believe that there's a value in leading a life in politics and being politically engaged.
Yeah.
So these are some of what one confronts.
I think a lot of what people see is that antagonistic, confrontational exchange that happens in politics, and that is there at the heart of it. And I can't lie, there's part of that I love. I love that robust debate. I love that, I love people getting passionate about what they believe in and hoping that throughout that, good ideas emerge. However, stick to the topic. Play the ball, not the man or the woman. But politics has developed to such a point that debate, rather than debating the topic, rather than debating the issue, just cut people off at the knees. And it's much easier to do that if you use personal attack, if you undermine people because of their gender, how they dress, what they look like, and it might get so far as what may or may not be happening in their sex life. So, in the case of Cory Bernardi, who of course used to be a senator and is not there in the Parliament anymore, I talk about in the book, there's an incident where late at night at the end of a parliamentary year, people were having Christmas parties around the building while there was still a very long, serious Senate debate going on in relation to children and families in immigration detention. And I'd been on my feet for hours debating amendments, trying to improve this legislation. I didn't support the bill that was being put forward by Scott Morrison, as he was immigration minister at the time. But I was trying to convince other members of the crossbench to work with us to try and at least reduce some of the negative aspects, to try and make it a little less harsh. Senator Bernardi kept coming in and out of the chamber, not to debate the topic, not sure he even understood what the bill was about, but just to antagonise me, to
distract you,
distract me, to put me off my game. And it went on for quite some time. He'd be yelling things out across the chamber. And, look, I don't know, the state that he was in exactly, but after this had all wound up, a colleague in the Senate questioned whether we should have, a no drinking rule for senators on duty. because his behaviour had been that bad. It had drawn that into question. And it got to the point where I'm on my feet speaking, and he came and sat kind of in the bench next to me and started whispering nursery rhymes in while I was on my feet. It was demeaning. It was to embarrass me. It was to put me off my game. It was intimidation. And then he started saying the name of a man he thinks I'd slept with. So,
and no one called him to account, the speaker?
The president did several times. He'd go out of the room, he'd come back in, out of the chamber, come back in. Finally, in this last incident when he was here, when I wrote this part of the book, I went back and watched the Hansa, and I got the video clip to watch it, to be very precise about, because I could remember just feeling creeped out by this.
Yes.
And shot of me on the video just recoiling. And I shot across to the president that perhaps we need some breathalyzers.
Good on you. So,
of which then I got told there was no need for that.
Oh.
No need for that, Senator Hanson-Young. Sit down.
No need for that.
So,
Okay, we've only got 5 minutes left, and you have to talk about
Senator Lionhelm.
And well, we had a discussion when we were talking about you writing this book, and you used the word slut-shaming.
Yes.
And we've got such a short amount of time, and I'm really sorry to ask you to do this quickly, but you decided, I don't want to paraphrase how putting your words in your mouth, but you decided to take on the attacks in a way. Was the Lionhelm, that encounter, that exchange in the Senate, was that a culmination of years of copying sexist abuse, innuendo, disparagement, denigration, and how do you feel at the you were vindicated, quite properly so, and how do you feel at the end of the process?
So when I called out what Senator Lionhelm had said to me,
maybe just say exactly what he said.
When I confronted Senator Lionhelm for yelling out to me in the middle of a debate that I should stop shagging men, I did that after years of putting up with that type of underhanded, below the radar behaviour. Things like that had been said previously, and I'd never done anything about it. I'd kind of tried to pretend I hadn't heard it. Could have been while I was on my feet, such as the example with Corey Bernardi, or could have been as I was, we were voting on a motion and what I wanted was going down, and they'd rub it in by saying something across the chamber. And it had gotten worse. It had gotten more vocal, it had gotten more frequent, it had gotten more obvious. And I had been stupid to think that ignoring it and ignoring the bullies would make them stop. It didn't. They just got louder. And I thought I stupidly and naively thought that if I pretend this wasn't happening to me, or that I didn't hear it, or it didn't impact on me, then I would, I looked strong. So they just got louder and louder because it irritated them. So when I called him out, I knew that it would be a risk, because when women call out this type of behaviour, more often than not, the questions come flying in their direction. But why are you upset about it? Well, it must be real then, or there must be something. Why are you so upset about this? Or why can't you hack it? Oh, I told you she just wasn't up to the job. Or maybe you are sleeping with everybody. I mean, that is the crux of what slut-shaming is. It's the shaming that comes from even the acknowledgement. Doesn't matter what the reality is. It is damaging because it is in full sight. And acknowledging it, calling it out, is what brings on the questions of themselves. So I knew there was a risk. I didn't expect that he was going to go on national television and double down. But he did. And
he's had to pay for it.
He's had to pay for it. I took him to court. Obviously, writing this book was, for me, a really important process for me to be clear why I was doing it. Yes. Writing the book was a really important process of me making up my mind that I did want to take this action, and that this action was important, not just for me, but for every other girl and woman who's ever been in this situation. And also for encouraging women into a life of politics. Because if what you saw, it was such a public display, what happened between David Leyonhjelm and I. It was all over the media. I was inundated. Thousands and thousands of people contacted me. And so many of them were women. And I felt a responsibility to say, don't let them win. If this puts you off having your voice heard, or putting your hand up, or thinking that leadership isn't for you, you've just let the bullies win.
But it's so hard. I want to finish with one last question very quickly. A victory, a mark in the sand, a line in the sand, and yet it goes on. The story of women in leadership roles in politics and other areas in the leading is the story of Sarah Hanson-Young. It's a story, that's the provocation that Sarah Hanson-Young presents in the Senate, that he should say something like that, David Leyonhjelm, or Cory Bernardi's behaviour, or all the other innuendos that you've had to endure. It feels to me from Gillard, Peter Credlin came out and supported you, Gillard, Banks, I mean, you can name the women and the price they've paid for saying, I'm not going to walk away. But what's changed? I'd hate to be defeatist, and we've got 2 seconds left. But
look, you know, I've actually seen a marked change in the Senate chamber. So that's a good thing.
Great. Good news.
And throughout this process, I mean, I stood up, I called out David Leyonhjelm, but then I called out 4 other men. They're all gone, and I'm still there.
That's a victory. That is a victory. Congratulations, Sarah Hanson-Young. Go nowhere, stay in the Senate, and may you prevail and change the world. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.